This is IBM Museum, and I'm back with the Zip Plus drive, and that's the parallel or SCSI model. It goes to and auto detects whichever connection that you have to the computer. I've got that on the bench behind me. I do have my tweener system turned around. I've got the back of it showing here, and I'm going to go through and show some connections, show how you can use these SCSI zip drives, the parallel port model, or that plus version that combines both the SCSI and parallel into that same unit with multiple computers through a switchbox. And I'll give some advice that you do this at your own risk if you connect up the zip drives the way I'm showing to a switchbox. And you have to be aware that typically you're going to have to go through and you would switch over to whatever selection you're going to make and then power the system up, power the zip drive and the system up. You're not going through and necessarily hot switching that, although you could have an instance where you have it connected to one system, one of the switch selections to a system that's powered up, copy over data to that zip drive that way, and then you could go through and you could effectively switch over to a second unit, go through and power it up, and have that zip drive be connected to that second system. Now, normally I have enough of these zip drives around at this point that I can have even them connected, or if I'm working copying files between two systems, I can have a zip drive on each of them. But this is just a way that you can do with these switch boxes, and they're a little bit dated at this point. They're not around anymore. It's kind of funny that I just have a one with the 3 connections on the back, and right now I've got actually this SCSI cable going to and this is a high density 50 pin connection. This is a connection that you don't want to connect up blind like I was trying to do for my parallel port. And I'll show that in just a moment and show connecting up to this box as well. But this SCSI cable goes to, I've got it to the A input. I don't know if people can see, this still has even the masking tape when I picked this up, probably yard sale. And I've got the auto detect cable of the plus unit and connected connection. So this B drive, the B is open for the moment. We'll get kind of rotating this around, and I'll go through and I'll power the system up. I'm going to go through and we're just going to solely work from DOS in this instance. I can make this other DOS sample video and work as comparable in under the XP for the SCSI side of things. Now, you could even have, as we'll go through in a moment, I mean, you can have one of these bigger boxes. I don't have a price tag on this one. And again, I'm just using that auto detect cable straight from that common port. And this one would have the ability for the 4 other connections to be able to be switched to that one, the A, B, C, and D as the front panel. And this is a global, I mean, I've heard of this brand in the past before. The humorously enough as well, this is a I'm kind of on the leash with the cables, but this is actually a Belkin model, Belkin components. And I'm trying to remember who owns Belkin now, as they've gone through, and they did have some products there for a while. I've got a number of probably Belkin products that were second sourced from some other manufacturers and things like that. But let's go through. We're going to power up the zip drive. I don't have to have a disk in there. I'm going to go through and just put that in at this point. We'll get the system powered up. It's a lot easier to blindly reach and find that power button on the tweener system than having this turned around and being able to connect up ports. For that little segment, I was actually going through and I was thinking that the parallel port was over here, and I was trying to go through and connect up to it, even with that no modem cable and things like that. And it's actually, in the color coding, it's that purple connection down here. So we're going to go through, we will switch over to the okay, and as it goes through the sequence to boot up, we'll get the splash screen again here in a moment, and it will beep. Okay. And then we'll go through and select the MS-DOS. We have the switch box over to the A connection right now. Of course, we don't have anything on the B yet. And it did go through, and we see it find that. And normally it labels that here. It's finding that, of course, and identifying that on the SCSI connection. And that can be confusing sometimes. But if we go through and do a D and a directory, we get the contents of that drive. So I'm going to go through, we can go through and power down the unit. I'll get switched back over to my camcorder. We're going to go through and power down the unit. And I have these other cables here. And this is a 6-foot cable. This is even faintly marked as a price of $8. And it's important for these cables in this instance to where it labels it as 25 wires. DB25 straight through cable. Oh, and this is actually, I'll have to go through. I didn't go through and check. I actually have a few of these cables in the pack. This is the wrong connection type for both ends, but it's good that I had a little bit of foresight. I was even looking at pulling that out of the package and having it 6 foot so it wouldn't be too much cable. But I do have this 15 foot. It's a good thing I brought that. Doesn't have a, yeah, it does have a label. 1725 at the time. And that's probably fine. These were about, $1 per foot in a lot of instances. And that even has the knurls, the standoffs for going through and other situations that we won't necessarily need. And it's good that we have this long cable. I'll go through, I can power down the unit, still have the disk in the drive for the zip unit. And we're going to go through. We have the proper connectors, pins at both ends, because what we're effectively doing, plugging that into the parallel port, we're able to see it this time and get to it a lot quicker. And we can go through and spin the retaining screws in there. And then on the other end, you know, it's just like we're effectively going through and we're putting the, you know, carrying over the whole parallel port, one for one, all those 25 wires in the connector. And those will typically have a little bit thicker of cable with because you can find like things like serial extension cables and things like that that may not necessarily use all the wires. And we'll just have all this wrapped up like that on the bench. I was hoping to have a 6-foot cable, but oh well. So we're going to go through. I'm going to switch this to the B. I've got that connected. Still have the zip drive connected to that common of each side. We'll go through. We'll power the unit up. Go through and press the power button on the tweener system. And let's go and switch over to it. Okay. We'll get the beep and the splash screen again. And again, I'm aware that this goes through kind of that slow boot up process with my menu to where I can, you know, it'll automatically go through after 25 seconds so you don't press anything and run the Windows XP. But we're going to go through and select MS-DOS again. We're going to have us a DOS-cember video. Probably not the last one of the month or the season. Okay, so it didn't find any SCSI logical drives on that time, but we can still see that iOmega and it identifies as SCSI ID 0 Lund 0. And iOmega zip 100 plus. And so we'll go through the same thing, D drive, do a directory, and there we have the contents of the disk with that in the parallel port mode. And you could have a, you know, as long as you have the right cable connections, you could go through and you can have one of these switch boxes and go through and, you know, connect up those units that way. I'm going to go through and show a couple listings out there, and compared to earlier, I was seeing a bunch of these. I'll just show 3 examples. We'll go through and kind of look at those as well. But let's get switched over to just the camcorder. For a moment, just get that on the background. That's fine. I will go through and pause, and I'll go through and bring up those pages just one by one. Okay, and I also had to see how that these pages were going to display, these eBay pages, under OBS, but because of course it just shows the generic page without you being logged into the browser or anything like that. And I'm just going through and copying over these links. There's not really any reason for me to go through and show these links, but you can go through and search on something like the Zip 100 SCSI to effectively get that. And I do even see another link here of another listing that I'll show, and I can just tell by the price and everything else of how this will show. And I want people to see that this is the iOmega Zip 100 SCSI parallel port external drive, new sealed. So this is effectively new in box, but they're identifying this that it is both the SCSI and parallel port. And if we go through and hover over that picture, we do see, you know, 4 parallel port PCs. And it goes through and shows desktop, notebooks, and laptops. So, you know, if you have a parallel port. So effectively on this one, there is nothing for this to be have SCSI in the item description. Somebody looking through for SCSI is going to be disappointed, of course, when they would get the unit in and it's marked for parallel ports. So I'm going to go through and pause again. I'll bring up the next listing. Okay, and I didn't look to see if this is the same seller for all that, but this is a very similar listing here that it does this Zip 100 SCSI parallel port external drive model. The listing is a lot the same. This one is $170. The other one was $180. So you're going through, somebody's bidding on this, and they're getting these drives in, and they may even be new in box, but they're, and this one is, to me, this is the other side. We saw the parallel port version before. This time we're seeing that down there at the bottom, and for Macs, PowerBooks, for PCs that have SCSI. And so this has nothing to do with the parallel port at all. For being $170, you think, somebody wants to go through and get, and maybe they're even thinking that this is one of the plug-ins that's going to go be able to switch between a SCSI and parallel port. And we've seen examples either way. We've seen the parallel port without the SCSI, and we see the SCSI without the parallel. So I'm going to go through and bring up the last example of this. Okay, in this last example, it has this iOmega Z100 zip drive parallel or SCSI plus 25-pin cable plus PSU. In other words, the cable and the PSU, I mean, normally you expect those to be included with the drives as it is. And this is not one of those new in box units. You don't see from the top view, they just show the cable plugged in, and you can't tell whether it's the parallel port or the SCSI port or even that auto detect from this angle. Now, this seller has a very blurry picture on the back side, and I can tell by the layout of this. It's going through, mainly you look at the zip drive and this blurry picture. And again, the drive is not all that expensive. So this is probably a decent drive, as long as it was good and doesn't have the click of death. It's got the components included with the drive that you could go through and connect this up to a system and have everything for that price. But this does show the kind of the parallel port, and you see the printer in that blurry image, that this is ultimately a parallel port model for all that you can see on the underside of this. So this has nothing to do with that SCSI. And, you know, there's going to be even maybe people that would argue, a seller would argue, well, SCSI is a parallel bus or something like that. But, I mean, in this case, it's talking about parallel being the parallel port used for a printer on those older systems. And, of course, we're talking about interfaces, in particular the parallel port, that are not commonly on modern systems now, and there's not typically SCSI connections typically on more modern systems. And of course, in those instances, you go with the USB connected zip drive, and I've shown how to go through and adapt an AT API or that IDE model of the zip drive to the USB port, with the caveat that you normally have a disk in the unit to go through and get myself back on the screen here to go through to where the operating system, in particular XP, even older, you know, Windows 98, Windows ME, Windows 2000, they're typically going to want to read the contents of that storage device, that mass storage device connected through USB. So you got to have a valid disk in the drive to kind of go through and work in those instances. But I've gone through and shown, you know, and with a switch box, and typically these are the biggest I've seen a lot of time when you talk about the whole 25 pins wired up between these ports on the switch. I've only seen the 4-port models, and you have that auto detect, or you have the zip drive to that common connection, and you know, it can be a parallel port model. This is just effectively just like a parallel port off the PC if you've got these 25 wire cables going into this from the different systems. So you could even have effectively, you could have 4 systems sitting there on situated on your long desk, and have each one of these, as long as you have the proper cable. I mean, and we're talking, you know, these 15-foot cables here, and I know I probably got some that are 25 foot to, you know, I don't think probably any longer. And it may be a little bit difficult now, but I mean, you don't have much competition because these cables are not, they're just not, people aren't just digging for them anymore. They don't have equivalents to the modern age. So that's just something to go through, and maybe if that's a good setup that you think, just keep in mind, you know, you do this at your own risk, and also the aspect of you're typically going to have to go through and have it connected up, power up the zip drive, and power up the system from just a cold boot on the system. And this is just not some hot swappable thing that you can go through. You might be able to do it with 2 systems, to where you could switch back and forth once both have initialized that disk, and be able to do things as well. But this is in the sense of you have one of these zip drives that are the parallel port, the SCSI, and we see how to go through on eBay and look at those listings, look at the boxes, and maybe even have to ask the seller, because the eBay sellers can go through and they can use just those stock photos sometimes, or something they found out there that doesn't truly represent what they have. And, you know, even sometimes you see the shrink wrap on the package, and then they go through and later on they're showing the contents inside. And typically they have something like that, they're going to want to leave it shrink wrapped just for the aspect when they go to sell it. And there are sellers that they can shrink wrap that stuff up again. They can make something that's not new look like something that is new. Just be wary in that, but just look for those things, those on the box, and ask questions to the seller and make sure that you have the protection from eBay, that if you get the item and it isn't what you want, make sure that you go through and you've worked out to where you can return that. And some sellers may have fee, or they may say no returns. Treat all those things going through, and I expect, especially for going through and selling these drives for $170, $180, which to me is very much, it's too high. Take $100 off the front of that, because to me, good prices for these units, even the Plus model, it's able to go between parallel and SCSI, I marked that out as about $50. And there's going to be, the parallel port models are going to be much more common out there. The SCSI models are sometimes, if you don't have the plush in it, those are a little bit more of a challenge to find, and they typically are higher prices. They're a little bit less common. Just look at all those aspects. And I've also said that you can find a drive out there, these zip drives, and a lot of time they'll offer that, they offer the insurance on there for a time span of, a year coverage or whatever else. Sometimes you can go as far as 2 years. I would think you'd want to get that, at least that initial coverage. If it's just a few dollars, you find a drive out there and you find the, it's got like a protection plan for like $6 for a year. It might be worth considering, because if you get a drive that has that click of death or something like that, then you can go through and utilize that to at least get the value back of the drive that you spent. So it's a little bit of insurance on that for that aspect. And I really haven't run into any of those click of death drives myself. I know that there are people out there that have, hopefully those units, when they're discovered, they're getting thrown out. iOmega's not doing any sort of return. And I'll cover a little bit more of the Steve Gibson Trouble in Paradise utility that goes through and detects if a drive is susceptible to that. And that's normally 16-bit Windows is how Steve wrote it up. And then I'll try it probably under 32-bit, and it should be able to run. But then that's also been ported over to the older Mac OS. And it might be interesting to see that on a, how it gets presented on an older Mac for that same utility of checking to see if it's going to be susceptible to the click of death. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's been a rather informative video. If you enjoyed it, click on that like button and subscribe to my channel, please. If you have not done so already, recommend it to your friends that are interested in this sort of content so they can subscribe too. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.